the billionaire's deaf daughter was ignorant until a janitor spoke to her through sign language. Imagine walking into a room full of people, but every voice feels like silence, every laugh sounds like nothing, and every face turns away because they don't know how to reach you. That was the life of Emily Harrington, the daughter of one of the world's most powerful billionaires. She lived surrounded by every luxury most people could only dream of, but her world was lonelier than anyone could imagine. Before we go into her story, remember to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Stories, because sometimes kindness appears in the most unexpected places. Emily had been born deaf. Doctors offered surgeries, devices, and complicated treatments, but nothing truly restored her hearing. Instead, she learned to communicate through sign language, her hands speaking the words her voice could not. But her family never learned. Her father, Charles Harrington, believed money could solve everything. He paid for private tutors, therapists, and schools, but he never sat with her long enough to understand her silence. He never raised his hands to speak her language. To the world, Charles was a man of power and wealth, but to his daughter, he was a stranger who had never tried to listen. At parties, Emily often stood quietly in corners. The glittering lights, the clinking glasses, the orchestra's music, it was all meaningless to her. She would try to join conversations, smiling politely, reading lips when she could, but people grew uncomfortable. They looked away, laughed awkwardly, or whispered about her as though she couldn't see. At school, classmates whispered jokes behind her back, teachers spoke too fast for her to keep up, and she scribbled notes begging them to slow down. Most didn't. Her world was beautiful on the surface but unbearably lonely. One evening, the Harrington mansion prepared for one of its grand galas. Chandeliers sparkled like stars, the driveway filled with luxury cars, and photographers swarmed the entrance. Inside, politicians, celebrities, and business tycoons laughed and networked. Emily appeared at the top of the staircase in a silver gown, looking every bit the princess. People admired her beauty but avoided her eyes. When she approached groups of guests, they smiled politely, then turned back to their conversations. One man even whispered to his wife, "She doesn't understand anyway," and chuckled. Emily's chest tightened. She excused herself and slipped away from the crowd, unnoticed, as always. In the servants' wing of the house, Daniel, a janitor, was finishing his shift. His uniform was worn, his shoes scuffed from years of scrubbing and mopping. He had known hardships, losing his wife years ago and raising his daughter Lily alone. But his heart was gentle, strengthened by patience and pain. His daughter had been born deaf too. He had sat night after night with her, learning sign language so she wouldn't feel trapped in silence. He knew the frustration of watching the world pass by without listening. That night, as he wheeled his bucket down the corridor, he noticed Emily sitting on a bench in the garden, her hands folded tightly, her face pale with sadness. Daniel set down his mop, hesitated, and then raised his hands. Slowly, carefully, he signed, "Are you okay?" Emily's eyes widened. Her heart leapt. Nobody in her family, none of her father's powerful friends, had ever spoken to her in her language. She signed back with trembling fingers, "You know sign language?" Daniel nodded. "My daughter is deaf. I learned for her." The world shifted for Emily in that moment. The silence that had pressed down on her for years cracked open. Beneath the lanterns in the winter garden, she poured out everything she had bottled up for years. She signed about her loneliness, about how her father never looked her in the eye when she tried to sign, about how invisible she felt in every room she entered. Danielle signed back stories about Lily, how she cried once when no one would sit with her at lunch, how he promised her she was never broken, just different. Emily's lips curved into a smile. When Daniel mimicked Lily's stubborn face, Emily even laughed, a sound she rarely made. For the first time in years, She felt seen. But the moment shattered when Charles Harrington appeared at the doorway. He saw his daughter with the janitor and frowned. "Emily," he said sharply. "Come inside." Emily hesitated, then turned to Daniel, signing, "Thank you." Daniel gave a small smile and nodded. Charles took her arm, muttering under his breath, "You don't belong out here with the staff." Emily couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. In her diary that night, she wrote, "He spoke to me. Not with words, but with kindness." At dinner the next evening, she signed angrily to her father, "Why won't you learn?" Charles frowned. "Learn what?" She slammed her hand on the table. "Sign language. To talk to me." He sighed, shaking his head. "Emily, I'm busy. I don't have time for hand gestures." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out. The next morning, Charles entered his office to find a letter on his desk in Emily's handwriting. "You don't see me. But last night, a janitor did. He spoke to me in my language. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Dad, why can't you do the same?" Charles read the words over and over. For the first time, his will felt like dust in his hands. He had built empires, but he had failed his daughter. That night, Charles sought out Daniel in the staff wing. Daniel stood quickly, expecting anger, maybe even to be fired. But Charles's voice was hesitant. "Mr. Daniel," he said, "I need your help." Daniel blinked. "Help, sir?" Charles swallowed. "Teach me. Teach me to speak to my daughter." So after the mansion went quiet each night, Charles and Daniel sat in the kitchen. Charles's hands stumbled clumsily at first, his movements awkward, his frustration clear. But Daniel was patient, reminding him gently that it wasn't about speed or perfection, it was about effort. Week after week, the billionaire's hands grew more fluent. He practiced signs late into the night, rehearsing apologies, rehearsing words of love. One evening, Emily entered the study. She froze when she saw her father standing there, his hands trembling. Slowly, he signed, "I'm sorry. I want to learn. Will you help me?" Emily's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she ran into his arms. For the first time, she felt her father's love in a language she understood. Months later, another gala filled the Harrington estate. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, and music filled the air. But this time, Emily was different. She walked into the ballroom with her head held high. When someone greeted her, her father stood beside her and signed the translation proudly. Conversations bloomed, not just spoken, but signed. The same guests who once ignored her now watched with awe as Emily and her father spoke fluently with their hands. At the back of the room, Daniel leaned on his mop, smiling quietly. His life remained simple, his shoes still worn, but his heart was full. He had given Emily more than words, he had given her connection. Emily spotted him across the crowded ballroom. With a grin, she signed, "Thank you, my friend." Daniel signed back, "Always." That night, Emily no longer felt invisible. She was no longer the silent girl in the corner of the room. She was a daughter who had finally been heard, because one janitor had taken the time to listen. And her father, the man who thought he owned the world, learned that love wasn't measured in money, but in effort. And that is how a billionaire's deaf daughter, ignored by the world, finally found her voice. Not through wealth, not through power, but through kindness. So let me ask you this, are you listening with your ears, or with your heart? If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Stories, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the loudest echoes.